That's all good.
Oh, hang on, what's happening? All right, we're recording. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Sporting Max. But today we are joined by two-time Olympian NBL champion. He's the father of two young boys who could potentially be following in his footsteps in the NBL, if not the AFL. Mike Worthington. Wortho, it's fantastic and an honour to have you on. How you going at the moment?
I'm doing good. Life is good in WA. I haven't been in lockdown as long as other people, which is good. And now that I've moved on to the next chapter of my life, it's been pretty exciting.
So, do you still have a sort of current involvement in the basketball community, from your personal standpoint of view?
I've been coaching NBL 1 for the last 2 years, but I'm no longer coaching there. And now I've sort of stepped into a new role with an NBA team as one of the lead scouts in Australia, which is good. I get to watch the NBL, which I was already doing, and now through the perspective of the NBA lens of seeing what's out there, whether that be the Next Stars program or, we look at people like Deshaun Tate and Torrey Craig who have played over here as imports and then gone in and been able to be great rotation guys for their teams.
Thanks for coming on, Mark. It's greatly appreciated. I want to start off with getting into your childhood and what growing up was like for you in Devonport in Tasmania.
I'm not from Devonport. That's a good start. From Bunbury, Western Australia.
I've checked about 5 websites and Devonport, Tassie, it said, far out.
No, WA boy. So Bunbury boy. It was interesting, obviously being a country kid and sort of going around where basketball wasn't really big back then. And obviously being a country kid meant my parents had to drive a lot up to Perth, like 2 hours up to Perth just to get me to a training session or, the games on the weekends, because majority of the time we played up in Perth.
Yeah.
And so I did that quite a bit as a kid, with a lot of time spent in the car, which was, it's what had to happen, what I needed to do growing up. So that was good. My parents both heavily involved in basketball. My dad was a really good basketball player as a junior, and my mum, she would always admit that she wasn't the most talented basketball player, but she was very scrappy.
Yeah.
And because as long as I could remember, I'd always be in the car going to mum or dad's training sessions and wanting to play myself. And then, slowly got into it and went from there.
So then what was your sort of path to being a Cairns Taipans development player, from the junior level up?
First year of state under 16s, I didn't make the WA country team, which probably shows how bad I was at that stage, because if you didn't make WA country, you were pretty horrendous, because we're typically on the lower end of the scale. Basketball-wise, made my second year of under 16s, made both year under 18s, which is great, and then I couldn't even get a gig in under 20s for the WA team. And I was going to go to Metro State, which has obviously produced quite a few handy players in the NBL now. And I got a phone call asking to go up and train with Cairns as a good sort of lead up to what I was about to do with college. And I live with John Dorge, who is an NBL legend, and really fortunate that he opened up the doors to his house and I was able to live with him. But then the training was really exciting, because one day I was guarding an Aaron Jaher in the point guard role, and the next day I'd guard Anthony Stewart, who was their shooting guard, and the following day I'd guard Ben Knight, who was their power forward, who was playing really good minutes at that time. And so I got thrown into the deep end as a 17-year-old, and sort of these are the multiple positions that you have to sort of be able to guard, and I sort of really enjoyed that sort of training because every day was different.
So what was that like to live with John Dorge?
He's a grumpy man. Dorji was really good, and obviously he'd made the jump from playing into the coaching role, spent time in New Zealand with the Breakers, and then Guy Malloy had asked him up to to Cairns, and John was really good. And he was tough on me. He also gave me the freedom, like that every 17-year-old kid want, but he wasn't shy to pull me in and clip me over the ears when I needed it. And I look back, those 6 months, it was a fun and exciting 6 months for me, like leaving my family, moving to the other side of Australia, couldn't get further apart from them. And that sort of started the snowball effect of me, not returning to Western Australia until 20 years later.
So you mentioned going to college in the US, to the Metropolitan State College of Denver. How did that opportunity sort of present itself for you?
Yeah, so the coach at that time was Mike Dunlap, who was a former Adelaide 36ers coach. And he had a good pipeline of Australians that had gone through. And there was guys called Lee Barlow and Kane Oakley and Shane Armett. They were already there before I got there. And once I got there, there was people, Luke Kendall and Daniel George were already there, which was great, that I had people that I could talk to, count on, rely on. Luke Kendall's still one of my best and closest mates to this day. But then we also saw a whole emergence of Australians coming through after that, where it was Andrew Harms, it was Drew Williamson. Once I left, Jesse Wagstaff, which led into Mitch McCarron and Nick Kay and all that. Sunday Debt. I mean, we had we were the other pipeline that St. Mary's wasn't, I guess, at that stage. Dunlap had been told by a couple of people, that I was a versatile sort of player. I was a bit of a country bumpkin, didn't know my head from my ass, and I'd went there, I guess, really sheltered and not really knowing what I was stepping into. And then it was a gradual build over the 4 years, from winning a national championship my freshman year, but not playing a whole lot, to being Division II Player of the Year my final year and getting to play a whole bunch. It was quite the roller coaster of a ride for those 4 years, but 4 years that I wouldn't have changed for anything in the world.
So what was your college experience sort of like for you, if you put aside basketball?
It's tough. You sort of go there for basketball, but then education gets in the way, and then at the same time you're a young kid, and you want to have fun. And I guess I was lucky that I had really good mates like Luke Kendall around, where we could sort of get that balance. We practiced really, really hard, and everyone knew that we were probably in one of the tougher programs to try and get through. But at the same time, we still enjoyed ourselves. And you look back on those 4 years, like Metro State isn't a massive campus. It's sort of known for having people that had either dropped out of school and started a family, or work got in the way, and then they'd come back and go to college. And so we didn't have a massive following as far as supporters or anything like that, but we didn't play for that. We played for winning. We played for growing from boys into men. And it was a really unique experience that we were very fortunate to have.
You mentioned playing under former Adelaide 36ers head coach Mike Dunlap. What was that like to, you've got someone who's coached in the NBL and knows, I guess, you guys' style of play from down under in the States?
Yeah, he was a very tough man. And when we had lost focus of why we were there, because other things, inevitably get in the way, he would always push us to continue to be a professional. And so the stuff that he taught us was, once we get out of college, we don't have people there holding your hand, like you either get a contract or you don't get a contract. And it's all based on the work that you do. And so he gave us this work ethic that we had to continually just strive and put in the extra work. And, if your shot wasn't falling, it wasn't because you knew it would turn around, because you put in the extra hours. And I guess when you're a young professional, a lot of people get tagged with, oh, he's a young pro, and so his highs are very high, but his lows are very low. And what we tried to establish was what does our worst game look like, and how do we still help and contribute to the team? And I guess Dunlap gave us that sort of inkling of, all right, maybe your shot's not dropping, but what do you do to impact the game? And I think if you look back on the careers of myself and Luke Kendall, you can probably say, all right, yes, we were known as scoring threats, but we impacted the game in many other ways outside of scoring.
Now, after returning home and playing for the Sydney Kings once again in the NBL, you won the Rookie of the Year award. How did you sort of earn your spot in that Kings team, and what was it like to be recognised as, the best Rookie of the Year?
It was tough. They were coming off 3 championships in a row, and then you get slotted in as a starter to that group. And it was a tough 3 years, to tell you the truth. We had, living in Sydney on very minimal money to start off your career, leading into the firepower debacle where, we weren't getting paid, and we were the best team going around. We had the best record, and for all of us, we weren't getting paid during that 3rd season. It was tough. And Gorgon was the master at motivating us to sort of throw it in their face. But it was tough those 3 years, to say the least. I think that we had some really good people in the organisation that we wanted to continue to show up and go to work for. I know for myself personally, it was my teammates that, I wanted to continue for us to win and do well. If there was a slither of hope that people, that had home loans and kids to feed at that stage, that, they didn't know when the next paycheck was coming through. So at the end of the day, awards are nice, but it was nothing I really played for at the end of the day. I think I was very fortunate that I was around a really good bunch of guys. You look in the first couple of years, I had CJ Bruton, I had Jason Smith, and a whole bunch of names and faces that were just really good pro people. Played with some really good imports as well. Fell short twice in 3 years at grand finals, but learned a lot from those days of playing at the Sydney Kings.
So with the Sydney Kings in those tough 3 years, how do you think the presence of guys like CJ Bruton, Jason Smith, like you mentioned, had an impact on you and helped you to become a better player?
Yeah, look, CJ was obviously the best point guard in the Australian point guard in the league at that stage. And CJ also took me underneath his wing and spent extra time with me and looked after me a fair bit. And for that, I've always been grateful for. He would always be really positive in the way that he spoke to me about my game and how I could help myself further. Jason was a fantastic leader, and I learned a lot from Jason. When it was my turn to become captain of clubs further on down the track, I was constantly still talking to Jason on how to deal with things, because his leadership that he brought to the table was outstanding, and probably the best leader that I'd played under in my time of playing, just because he not only demanded respect, but he earned our respect, and how he went about his business and how he did things. And when you got someone like that, you're willing to do whatever it takes to jump through the fire just to try and help him out in any way possible. And then in return, he helped me become a better leader when it was my turn to lead a couple of clubs later on down the track.
You've represented Australia at the FIBA World Cups and Olympics, particularly the 2008 Beijing Olympics and the 2012 London Olympics. What were these Olympic experiences like for you? And, playing against guys like Kobe Bryant and LeBron James, just to name a few. Can you talk to us about that American Dream Team in that 2008 Olympics?
Yeah, they were pretty lucky to share a court with myself and Chris Anstey and a few other guys. I always say this to anyone that asks me about the Olympics and, my experience. I think I was very well, first off, anytime I got to play for my country, I considered it the biggest honour you could possibly get. And I loved every second that I was able to put on the green and gold. Always wore number 11, which was that was my parents' numbers growing up. They both wore 11, and something that I was really proud to wear. I never wore 11 in the NBL or in any of my stints overseas. I just wore my Australian number as number 11 because of my parents. But I was fortunate to go to 2 Olympics because you get to the first Olympics and your head just spins. Like you're seeing people that you've watched previously, you're sharing tables at the dining lounge with them, and it was just a surreal experience, that first one, and you get to soak it all in, and you see a lot of athletes sort of lose their head and lose their mind because they get there and they sort of drop the ball because they forget why they're there. And while I did well at Beijing, I felt a lot more comfortable in London, and maybe my role wasn't as large in London, but I felt more comfortable in myself and knowing the reason I was there and all that. And so I look back on those memories as, wow, what an unbelievable experience. It's funny, as a kid, I was a half decent footballer as well. And when it became time to choose between football and basketball, and I made my choice of basketball, people said, well, why do you want to play basketball over football? And I said, well, I can go to the Olympics in basketball. I can't go to the Olympics in football. I guess the Olympics was always my ultimate goal. And then to be able to do that not once but twice, I think I look back on it and I go, hey, how cocky of me to make that comment, or why choosing basketball over football, and B, how fortunate am I to be able to represent my country twice at the Olympics, play against some incredible teams, and got so many good stories that, you know, now my kids get to share those stories. They know that their dad got to play against LeBron and Kobe and a whole list of names, which is pretty cool.
So what was it like to play alongside someone on the Boomers like Paddy Mills?
Yeah, incredible. And I think we've just seen Paddy just get better with age. Paddy's gotten better. Joe's gotten better. I guess that watching them win a bronze medal was the absolute ultimate. I don't think I've cried before at a sporting event, but that one made me cry.
Wow.
Just was really happy for those guys. And for Paddy and Joe in particular, and throw Delhi in the mix in there as well, that they have been through it all. They've seen it. They came in as really young guys into the program. You know, when there was Matt Nielsen and Sam McKinnon and Glenn Saville and myself. I'm a little bit younger than those three, just and Anstey and all that. But they got to see it, and then, you know, the trademarks that were put in place, they've made them better as time has gone on. And we just saw, everyone talks about the Boomers culture. I mean, the Boomers culture is I think it's the best it's ever been. And the proof is in the pudding that they've won the bronze medal now. And I'm excited because it's not that far away in 3 years' time, and they get another crack at it, and I think they can go a step further.
So what does it mean to you to be a part of Australian Boomers history?
I guess I can sit back now and say it's pretty cool that I got to be a part of it. I don't know how much of an impact I had in those years. All I can tell you is that I wore my heart on my sleeve every time that I played, and it didn't matter if it was a exhibition match against anyone that no one really cared about at 3 o'clock in the morning back in Australia. It was still the ultimate compliment, the ultimate highlight for me. Whether it was my first game or my last game that I got to play for Australia, I always felt like it was the biggest honour that I could achieve, and I was super proud of what I was able to do over those 10 years of representing our country, and I wouldn't trade it for the world.
So now, after your time, your sort of 3 years with the Sydney Kings, you signed with the South Dragons after the 2008-2009 season. What sort of made you want to sign with the Dragons, I guess?
Well, after everything that happened with the Kings and Firepower, and I knew I didn't know that the Kings were going to fold at that stage, but I knew that I had to get out of Sydney, and I had talked with Mark Cowan and Rafi Jaminda, who were the owners of the Dragons. Then they signed Gorge as the coach. So there was already synergy there with Gorge over the past 3 years, and I knew he could get the best basketball out of me at that stage. And I was still in a very much I just wanted to win a championship. That's all I wanted to do. And when you go to a club that I think they were 4-20 the year before, bottom of the ladder, but they brought Gorge in and they wanted to bring myself in. I knew that they'd got rid of a bunch of players, and I had an inkling of who they wanted to get or going forward. And I thought it was just a fantastic chance for the second club in Melbourne to go up against the Melbourne Tigers, who'd won 2 out of the last 3 championships. And I just saw it as a real opportunity to ply my trade in Melbourne. It was between the Dragons and the Wildcats at that stage, and the Wildcats weren't doing too well. I think they'd finished 7th or 8th, and just scraped into the finals at that stage. And I didn't see a definitive way forward immediately with that group. I did with the Dragons, and we're lucky enough to go on and win a championship that year, but then to fold straight after the championship, knowing the roster that we had, and we felt like that was a dynasty waiting to happen. It just didn't happen, mainly because of politics at that stage.
So what was your championship experience like for you? And then, when you heard the news that you had to fold pretty much straight after?
Look, I loved it. That was a fantastic year. If you just sort of look at our roster to understand, like having Mika Vacona beside me, having Adam Gibson, Joe Engels, Dante Smith, Tremel Darden, Matty Burston, Nick Horvath, Nathan Herbert, Reece Carter. We loved each other's company. We loved training hard against each other. We loved pushing the boundaries. But then we also really enjoyed our time off the court with each other. We thought it was probably something that I never got to replicate again as far as a group. And then you get the news that I remember we'd had a training session. I was driving back home and I was going over the Westgate Bridge, and I got a phone call from the owner saying, I need you to call the rest of the group and come to the office straight away. And I knew straight away something wasn't right. We got to the office and basically they said that we were folding as a club, and I guess it was a bit of a gut punch at that stage, just because we knew how good we had it as a group, and we knew that we had a dynasty in the making, and especially after what had happened with the Sydney Kings the year before, then to happen with the South Dragons a year later, especially after winning a championship, it just felt like things couldn't get any worse at that stage, but lo and behold, later down the track.
What was it like to play under a guy like Brian Gorgon?
Yeah, he's a master motivator, very good X's and O's. He applies his trade so well. He works his ass off. Gorge is not a guy that just rocks up and it works for him. He puts so much time and effort into scout, into video, to individuals, knowing what people like, don't like, how to push them to their limits without breaking them, having the tough conversations, being able to pick people up. There's a reason that he succeeded as the Boomers coach, is because he's that damn good.
So what was it like to play with a young Joe Engels in that South Dragons team?
I lived with Joe as well, and so I'd like to say that I taught him everything that he knows, but he was very, very good already, and he knew he was good. It's pretty cool to see him now and how far he's come along in his development as a human. And I say that not that he was a bad human with us, but now the work that he's doing with autism awareness and all that, it's just amazing what he's been able to do and the awareness that he's been able to create. And so what you want about Joe as a basketball player, the thing that I liked about Joe the most was him as a person. It always has been. And very fortunate to live with him for the year. Very grateful that I saw the start of what was an unbelievable career that's still ongoing, and it's fantastic to see what he's doing in the NBA now.
So after that season where the Dragons folded, you signed with crosstown rivals of the Melbourne Tigers for the 09-2010 season. How did you find your experience with the Melbourne Tigers in the one season which you were there?
It was difficult. Obviously, I was hated by the Melbourne Tigers. Like, I'd just beaten them for a grand final. I was the winning captain. I was about to sign with Cairns when the Dragons went down, and it was actually a phone call from Chris Anstey that said, "Have you signed yet?" And I said, "I haven't." He said, "Well, don't do it. Let's have a conversation first." And I said, "All right." And by this stage, Chris and I had become very close mates through the Beijing experience. We didn't always see eye to eye when we first started playing against each other. And then through the Boomers experience, we became very close mates. I came into the Melbourne Tigers, who had been to 4 grand finals in 4 years. They'd won 2, they'd lost 2. Chris was going to play his last season. Sam McKinnon was going to play his last season. We had a import in Julius Hodge, who was interesting to say the least. And it just didn't click that year. On paper, we had a very, like, if you look on paper, you see Julius Hodge, you see Sam McKinnon, you see Chris Anstey, and you see myself. You're like, all right, well, this team can go all right. Chris missed the first half of the season with hip surgery and was never fully right again. Sam McKinnon was coming off blood clots, and he wasn't fully right. I had just had my first son, Taz, and so a lot of sleepless nights. And Julius Hodge hardly ever trained for all the peculiar injuries that he seemed to have had. So it just didn't click that year. We had Al Westover as coach, and I loved Al. And he tried to motivate us and tried to get us there, but at the end of the day, we were probably a little bit too old, a little bit too grumpy, and you know, we just didn't quite have all the pieces that we needed to make us a successful team at that stage.
I understand you've played overseas in Puerto Rico, Serbia, and Germany. How do you find adjusting overseas and sometimes the language barriers?
Germany was good because we won a championship in Germany, and that was straight after the Dragons championship that I went over there and was able to win the Bundesliga championship with Bruce. And so we had a really good team. We'd finished 5th in the regular season, and we were able to knock off 4th place and then continue our way all the way to the championship. We won in game 5 against Frankfurt, which was awesome. Serbia, I was doing all right, and then I had torn everything in my shoulder and had to get a shoulder reconstruction, so I had to leave halfway in between. And then Puerto Rico, I got fired from my first team because, let's just put it, I wasn't the athlete that the owner wasn't looking for. And then I came home from the second team for the birth of my second child, Axel. I guess if you roll up all the international experience together, you have to be really comfortable in your own skin. When you don't speak the language of all these different countries, if you're not playing too well, it's easy to get into your own mind and say that they're talking about you. When in the case, it's really, for the majority of the time, they're not. And so as long as you're doing the work that you need to do and putting in the work at practice, and then in the, showing all your heart in the game, you tend to be okay. But if you're not, it can be easily misconstrued as people talking crap about you behind your back, or in another language, as it was. But that was never the case in my experience, and I really enjoyed the experience of having to play overseas and in different countries, meeting a whole bunch of different friends that I'm still friends with today. It's such a cool experience, and very grateful that I was able to do that.
So how did you earn the opportunity to get to sign with the Gold Coast Blaze in 2010?
Joey Wright basically made it happen.
Mm-hmm.
I've got a lot of time for Joey, and he was probably the toughest coach I had.
Wow.
But I say that in a good way. Like, he was tough on his best player just as much as he was tough on the last guy on the roster.
Mm-hmm.
So his consistency, he didn't let anything slide, and that I appreciated. And sometimes it was frustrating, and you have arguments with your coaches and stuff like that, and then you look at the bigger picture at the end of the day, and you're like, well, why did he do it? And he had all the right intentions for myself. Mm-hmm. The Blaze struggled in that second year, we're one game away from a grand final again. And that was, sort of the way that your basketball journey goes. It's tough to make grand finals. It's extremely tough to win them. You sort of need a little bit of luck, and luck wasn't on our side again in that year, the second year with the Blaze. But I enjoyed playing under Joey. I thought we had a really good Australian core there. Once again, Gibbo, Chris Golding, myself, James Harvey, Tom Garlett, Steve Hoare. We were really, really loaded and ready to go. And then once again, you get the phone call saying that the Blaze was folding, and you sort of throw your hands up at that stage and just surrender. So it is what it is at the end of the day. And I was pretty glad to get out of the Gold Coast at the end of those 2 years, that's for sure.
So what did you think when the Blaze folded? You played for a couple of clubs now that have folded.
It's annoying. There was no consistency, especially when you look at the league now and see how well off they are and what players are getting paid. Definitely played in the wrong era. However, it is what it is. I mean, all these experiences give you something on the way, and while it feels like you sort of get shafted a little bit at the same time, I mean, it just sort of galvanizes you at the same time. And like I said, by the end of it, I was pretty happy to get out of the Gold Coast and move on to the next adventure.
So when you came back to the Melbourne Tigers in 2013, then a year later they sort of switched their name and rebranded as Melbourne United to sort of connect all those clubs who had folded in Melbourne over the years together. What did you think of that move by the owners? Did you notice a difference between the culture environment between the Tigers and United?
Well, yeah, it was tough. I was obviously, as the captain of the club at that stage, I was thrust into the media to answer a lot of these questions, and they were really smart in how they did it. And while people didn't see it at the time, it was the right move to make. When you're living in Melbourne, obviously Melbourne Tigers Juniors is a huge association. And if you're a kid that plays for Sandringham, Dandenong and all that, how do you tell your kids, oh, you got to play against these juniors, but you got to support the Melbourne Tigers in the NBL? Like there's no connect there. And so by taking the Melbourne Tigers name away, while the history was there with the Tigers, the longevity of Melbourne going forward was to try and unite all the associations under one. Now, obviously, the Phoenix have come in now to take their share of the market as well. But I thought it was very intelligent at the time for them to rebrand and remarket them as United, as much as it probably hurt that smaller population of Melbourne Tigers supporters growing up.
So was there a difference in the group or environment at the club once they became Melbourne United?
Well, interesting time, obviously. When I was at the Melbourne Tigers, I had my close friend Chris Anstey coaching me. We rebranded to United. Anstey lasts one game before he's let go. And then Darren McGavin takes over as head coach. And so I guess it was a changing of the guard at Melbourne. And I think years down the track, it's hard to put your finger on why it all went down the way that it did. Whether it was Chris being let go after one game, I got let go after being club MVP, and I think that they just wanted to move in a different direction at that stage. And Dean Demopoulos came in as coach, and he wanted me to stick around as a player, but that wasn't to be. That was management's call at the end of the day. And look, it was just another step in the journey. They've obviously become very successful under Dean Vickerman. They've had staples in Chris Goulding there for a long time now, and obviously David Barlow as well. And so they've done very well over the last couple of years and been very successful. And obviously they're still one of the powerhouse clubs of the competition right now.
Now, we've recently had Darren McDonald, DMAC, on the podcast. What was it like to, play under him for a bit of time? Yeah,
I think, like every coach, you sort of take bits and pieces that you like. And I like talking to DMAC. I could talk basketball all day to DMAC. He was great with that. And obviously, I was his captain, so I was his guy. And I think majority of the time, I tried to do it through my work ethic and showing our group the work that needed to be done, shooting extras and stuff like that. But obviously, as most people know, I was pretty vocal as well, outgoing and strong in the media, in my my beliefs, what I thought. And it's funny in hindsight now. I wish I wasn't that. I wish I was probably more known for playing. But when people talk about me, they talk about that I was a hard-nosed competitor and I was outspoken. And looking back, I probably wish in a lot of ways I was different verbally back then than what I was. And but DMAC was really good as far as he was always in communication with me, always wanted to know what I thought or what I saw on the court, because he'd been that point guard for so long that could make reads on the fly. And I guess coaches put certain trust in what players they talk to and what they feedback that they get back to make changes. And I think DMAC was that for me.
You then returned to the Cairns Taipans, where your career all started in 2015. What was that like to come back to the Taipans to finish off your career?
Yeah, it was sort of full circle. Narran Fern was pretty, they were coming off a grand final appearance versus New Zealand, and we tried to make things work. That first year I got there, just sort of didn't click. Fantastic group of guys, really appreciative of my time, and obviously winding up in Cairns just wasn't to be. I think that last year of my career, when I knew even in the pre-season it was going to be my last year of playing, then to have the shoulder injury midway through the season, I didn't train for, I'd want to say from halfway through in the season, I never had another training session with the group. I played with everything torn in my shooting shoulder. I was basically having 2 injections a game and multiple multiple tablets just to get through the season, knowing that it was going to be the last time. So if I'd ruined everything, then there was nothing. I knew what it was at that stage.
Mm-hmm.
And then we were once again one game away from a grand final, which sort of was the theme on the back end of my career. We were so close to getting there again, didn't quite make it. And the cool thing about that last year, I think come Christmas, not even past that, I think it was probably 4 weeks to go in the season, we were bottom of the ladder.
Oh.
We made it. The season was that close. We finished the season second on the ladder.
Yeah.
We just had this run at the end, and then we run into Bryce Cotton and the Wildcats.
Mm-hmm.
That was it. That was my career. We were done. Out in 2. Got to finish my career in Perth, which was symbolic as well. Obviously, being my home state, I still believe I've got the best farewell send-off that any player's ever got. Adelaide gave me a great farewell in the final regular season game in Adelaide, which was a really nice tribute. And then to have the RAC Arena basically standing and cheering me off as I walked off the court for the last time, it doesn't get much better than that. And, really grateful for Adelaide for what they did, really grateful for Perth and what they did. It was a really nice tribute by both of those clubs to give me that sort of send-off that I didn't have in a home game in Cairns.
I want to go back to on January the 13th, 2016. You played your 300th NBL game. What does that mean to you to, be in the history books of the NBL to, get 300 games?
Yeah, pretty wild, to tell you the truth. And I look back on my career, and if you would have asked me as a kid, what do you want to do in the NBL? If I played one game, I would have been a kid from an under 16 team and a state team.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that my journey took me that far into my career, and I was able to play 300 games and was one of the better players in the comp during those 300 games. I look back on it as a really proud accomplishment that I was able to do that, sort of open up the doors for country kids in WA to see that was a real path that you could take. Whether that was, Cam Glidden, who's from Bunbury as well, that came and did the same sort of thing now in his career. I look back on it and really proud of my efforts, quite proud of the journey that it takes to play 300. That's a bit of longevity in there as well. And, I got to win a championship at the end of the day, which is what the real reason that you play. And that's the only thing that really matters, is that I actually got that championship along the way in my career, and I was able to do that as captain of the club as well.
So how did you make the decision to retire?
Basically, I couldn't, after a second shoulder reconstruction, there was no chance in hell that I was going to get up. I was probably going to miss a fair chunk of the following season, and I'd already said to myself during pre-season, I actually didn't mind running at that stage, but that last pre-season just sucked. And I knew if I wasn't willing to put in the work in the off-season, then I wasn't going to put out a shell of myself in the regular season. And while I was still playing good basketball, and, I got to walk away on my terms, which not every player gets, I got to walk away still playing pretty good basketball. At the end of my career, even with a busted everything in my shoulder, I was still being productive for my team. I didn't want to be the guy that was all of a sudden coming off the bench, play 5-10 minutes a game, just holding on to any sort of relevance of being a basketball player. I think I wanted to respect the game a little bit more than that and walk out with my head held high, knowing that I'd given everything body-wise to the game, and the game had given so much to me as well.
So your 335th and last game against the Perth Wildcats and Bryce Cotton in a Game 2 semi-final loss. What was the farewell like at RAC Arena?
best that there ever was, as far as I'm concerned. I don't think any other NBL player's got a better send-off to this point, which says a lot. And it's funny, you don't think of those thoughts, but as the clock wound down, and I knew that was it. That was going to be the last time. And sort of before the game, there's a really cool photo during warm-ups, and I just went and sat down. And I sat down because I wanted to soak it all in, knowing that I wasn't going to play again in Perth, knowing that that's probably the best crowd you can play in front of.
Yeah.
Soak it all in, and then you don't care of the reaction of the crowd afterwards. I knew there was going to be some reaction. I didn't expect it to be as good as what it was, and very grateful for the 11,500 people that were there. I'm grateful for the Wildcats organisation and how they treated the moment, and to walk off in your home state with a lot of family and friends in the crowd was really cool.
One of, or if not, two of your boys might be following in your footsteps in basketball, if not football.
Yeah, they both love their basketball, and they don't mind football. And it's, obviously basketball-wise, they love their NBA and they're really into their hoops. They love it. Football-wise, they've always had a bit of a fascination with football, and my current partner is an AFLW player. She's a vice captain of West Coast, and so she likes to have the football conversations, and I try and stay in my lane with the basketball conversation. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm happy with whatever they choose to do. I just want them to be happy. I know it's tough when you try and follow a parent who's good at something, and very rarely does that pan out well, because of the expectations that not necessarily that they put on themselves, but I think other parents and people, coaches, put expectations on kids as well. I just want Taz and Axel to have fun at the end of the day, and whatever their journey takes them, they're 12 and 10, they're still young. I didn't really get into it seriously till a bit later on. So I just want them to enjoy for now, enjoy playing with their mates, enjoy them. When the time comes to make a decision, choose whatever they want and just be happy with their decision.
So I think I heard and saw you took them to the state champs. What was that like?
Well, yeah, they live in Queensland, and so that's always good, taking them to state champs. And I just enjoy watching them play and getting them around their teammates. They're both really good teammates. A huge sense of pride anytime I get to watch them play, and they can't do any wrong in my eyes, which makes me a typical parent. Basically, at the end of the day, we think our kids can do no wrong, and they're the greatest. And I don't think any different of mine. I think they're the best, and I just love their attitude and the way that they go about things.
You mentioned your partner being a vice captain of the West Coast Eagles AFLW team. What's that like to, have her who's on the footy side of things and then you on the basketball side?
I keep telling her she's the second best athlete in the house, but I don't think that's the case. No, she's a pro's pro, and very good at what she does, and pretty highly regarded in the women's football system, or just football in general. And she's definitely more professional than I ever was as a professional athlete, and she's got quite a number of years left in her career, and just going to enjoy her seasons, which kicks off here pretty soon. I think that's a season number 6 for her, and
wow.
She's very inspirational, and she's been it's actually been really nice being the person supporting, not being the person being supported. Which is a different role for me, and sort of know when to talk to her about stuff and when to leave stuff alone, because having been in those that seat before, it's a fine line between wanting to share what's happening in your life and wanting people just to listen and sort of go with the listen first attitude until she asks for my opinion on something and how to deal with something, having probably been in those positions before as a leader.
Now the rumour file is the West Coast Eagles wanted you to have a trial. Is that right? Yeah,
so after the London Olympics, I was 29 and West Coast flew me over and I actually had a tryout with West Coast.
Wow.
At 29 at that stage, it's pretty hard to make the changeover, especially they say it's, a good 2-3 years for someone to fully cross codes. And I don't think it's necessarily that, because we've seen many a player do that, whether that's Jack Madgen, who was my old teammate at the Taipans, who's done really well.
Yeah.
With Collingwood, or Hugh Greenwood, he's been exceptional in his role now with North Melbourne. So yeah, it was fun. I enjoyed it, but at the end of the day, probably a little bit too old to try and go up to football. And plus, Dana would tell I'm probably too soft to play football. I'll stick to basketball, I reckon.
What's your best advice to anyone who wants to be a successful professional basketballer like yourself?
Well, I don't think this has got anything to do with basketball, but just life in general. And it's easy to put in the work when someone's watching. It's the work that you do when no one's watching, and what type of work it is. And so for me, I'd always pride myself on the extra work that wasn't around the group or wasn't around the team. You've got to be able to go the extra mile, I guess. And so that's one part of it. And the second part is choose your circle of friends, of your influence really carefully. And so it's easy to get carried away when you're a professional, but I think, whether it's playing sports or life in general, the circle of influence that you carry around you carries a lot of weight. And I know you had the great guru, Mark Sainsbury, on the other day, and talking about our group. That's the circle of influence, that you sort of have, whether it is Guru or Chris Anstey, Andrew Parkinson, like those guys I trust with everything. And that's Luke Kendall. He's another one, obviously, someone who shared my journey from college all the way to now. Really cool to have people like that in your life. And, they always say we live in an era where everyone's got friends on Facebook. So like, oh, look, I've got, a couple hundred friends, a couple thousand friends. But who are your absolute close friends that would do anything for you? And I'm lucky that I have a handful of guys that I know that I could call at a drop of a hat that would do anything for me, and vice versa. So work hard when no one's watching, and choose your circle of influence carefully, because they will be the people that will guide you in the right direction. What's
it been like to know Andrew Parkinson and then see the sort of tough time, he's been going through and how he's recovered?
Yeah, so I guess my story with Parky is a little bit different to other. I didn't play with Parky. Obviously, he's a bit older than me. But then when he got his cancer diagnosed, it actually coincided with my dad getting cancer.
Wow.
And so Parky and I were becoming friends and mates. But then I got him in contact with my dad, and they've become really close mates, because as much as Parky or Dad would want to tell me what's going on with them and all that, it's hard for us to probably comprehend, because we're not actually going through it. But here's two guys that are going through the same thing at the same time. And so I think they talk to each other like 3 or 4 times a week now, whether it's text message or phone calls, just to check in on each other. So I guess my bond with Parky has galvanized even further, knowing that he's going through the same thing as my dad's going through. And now that we've created a bond between him and my dad that is, thick as thieves, it's pretty special.
Thanks, Werlo, for coming on today and putting aside, 40 minutes or so of your time to come on and have a chat. It's been an absolute honour.
Thanks, Max. Keep up the good work, all right?
Yeah, I will, definitely.
Cheers, mate.
Thanks, Werther. Stay tuned, everyone, for some more Sporting Max.